I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to anyone listening on the internet, wherever or whenever you are. This is Joe DeMar, and for the next hour, we're going to be talking about the environment, because you've tuned in to For a Green Future. And For a Green Future is a program where we talk about the environment and ecology, and we talk about them in a way that goes to how they affect you, how they affect your pocketbook, how they affect your health, how they affect your happiness and your family. And when I say we talk about it, I literally mean we, because this is a call-in show, a live call-in show here in Toledo. And I'm asking you to call in at 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. We're happy to take your call on any environmental or ecological topic. And, just because we love talking environment. Now, don't worry, this is, ESPN, a sports channel, 106.5 The Ticket. And sports will be back at 9 o'clock with Mick Gonzalez in the cheap seats. But just for the next hour or so, we're asking you to sort of broaden your horizons a little bit and think about the wider world. Think about the ecology and environments that affect you. And you might notice I'm a little bit out of breath because this morning I went and watched the start of the Glass City Marathon, which is running literally right this minute. There's people out there putting in that 26.2 miles. And I saw the start of the race. It was very exciting, and it's a beautiful thing. And then I had to run back to my car in order to make it back to the studio in time to do the show. And unfortunately, running that half mile kind of winded me. I've got have people behind me that are running 26 miles, so it's kind of embarrassing to kind of get tired after running only half a mile. But I made it, and I made it in, and I'm very happy to talk to you. And it reminded me of something. A lot of you probably aren't old enough, but some of you probably remember 1984 when the Olympics were in Los Angeles. And it was a great Olympics. They did very well, but there was something that happened at those Olympics that's kind of always stuck with me. And that is that at the opening ceremonies, they had this plan, that they had this trained eagle. It was a big, beautiful, majestic eagle. And at the critical moment, just before the lighting of the torch, they were going to have the eagle come in and swoop over the entire auditorium and go up and land right over by where they were going to light the torch. And it was supposed to be, representing America and this beautiful, wonderful, patriotic thing. Unfortunately, in the run-up to the Olympics and the practices, the eagle died. And everybody was wondering, oh man, why did the eagle die? And they did a postmortem, and it turned out that the smog in Los Angeles actually killed that eagle. And it just reminded me that no one appreciates clean air more than a runner. If you're running long distances, and the longest I ever run is 10K. But if you're running and you're in smoggy weather, you're in weather with like high ozone and or truck exhaust, you really, really feel it. It's not good. And so if you're someone who runs, you know the importance of clean air. And so you understand how terrible it is that the Trump administration is trying to essentially do away with clean air regulations. He's still pushing on in his plan to cease regulating mercury emissions. And that in itself is bad enough because mercury is a terrible pollutant. It causes birth defects. It affects people's nervous systems. Mercury is one of those things we've known is toxic for hundreds of years. And yet, they're trying to pretend it isn't. But mercury is particularly important because the pollution controls you put into place to stop mercury also stop a ton of other pollutants. And so by keeping the mercury out of the smokestacks, we keep the air much cleaner for a whole bunch of different kinds of pollution. And the same way, if we stop regulating mercury, that's going to allow tons of other sorts of pollution into the air. And, you can't run a marathon, or I couldn't run a marathon. Well, I can't run a marathon anyway right now. But if you're in smoggy weather, if you're in deep air pollution, running a marathon will actually injure your lungs. It won't make you healthier. It'll actually make you sicker. So we've got to stop Trump on that topic. And as I said before, this is a call-in show, and we're willing to talk on any topic on the environment. And in fact, if you're listening to this show regularly, usually I have a guest on talking about one particular thing. This show, I purposely did not do that. This show, it's a call-in show. I want to hear from you. I want to hear from the audience. I want to see what you guys want to hear about, what you want to talk about about the environment and ecology. And calling in at 866-240-1065 at any point in the show, no matter what topic we're on, call in and we will stop talking and we'll take your call. And, this is a point. I'm going to have a guest again next week. We're going to have John Zanfordino. He's a city councilman at Bowling Green, where they're looking at putting in a ban on plastic bags. So I have a guest lined up for next week and after that. But this week, I wanted you to be the guest. I wanted you to be the one to call in and give me your opinion, share with all of us what you think about the show, about the environment, about whatever issue affects you, because there's so many environmental issues going on right now. The attacks are on so many fronts. They're trying to wipe out the wolves. They're trying to eliminate the endangered species designation for wolves. Trump just put a fella who kills wolves for fun in charge of protecting wolves and endangered species. So all sorts of things are happening. So whatever you want to talk about, you can call in about. Now, there is one thing that's going on right now that's kind of critical, and that is this proposed bailout for Ohio's nuclear power plants, Davis-Besse and Perry. And this past week, it was Tuesday, in fact, I actually went to Columbus and I spoke in front of the Ohio House Subcommittee on Power Generation. And it was very interesting. It was a chance to really get out there and put out into the public just exactly why we shouldn't be wasting money bailing out these plants. And it was fun. It was interesting, and I learned a lot. I think I'd said before that I've called my Ohio state legislators about this, and my senator, Teresa Gavarone, sent me back a letter which said absolutely nothing. It just said, I'm going to be watching this issue closely, which in political speak means I'm not going to tell you anything. But we can safely deduce from her past votes that she's not going to pick the environmentally correct option, that she's going to most likely go with the Republican party line on this question. But my House of Representatives person, Mr. Gunbari, was newly appointed by the Republican Party. I called his office once he was appointed and got a call back saying Mr. Gunbari opposes the bailout. And I was just ecstatic. And I think I reported on this last week that at least we have one Republican legislator who's going to be choosing the environmental path, choosing the fiscally sound path instead of trying to burden all of us with paying for a source of energy that we don't want. But when I got to Columbus and started speaking in front of this subcommittee, it turns out Mr. Gunbari had been appointed to this subcommittee, and he was the most hostile of the representatives questioning me about my position in opposition to using this money for nuclear power. So either he's playing some really deep political game, making it look like he's opposed and he's going to come out in favor, or he just lied because it was just a phone call from his office. There was no documentation. I'm leaning towards the lie. I'm leaning towards just telling a constituent what he wanted to hear as opposed to telling the truth, because it gets you off their back and it's much easier. And there's no way, like I said, it was a phone call. There's nothing in writing, so you can come back later and say, oh, I never said that. Or my staffer misunderstood my position, or whatever excuse it needs. But big disappointment from Representative Gunbari. So, but this is coming to a crisis, this bailout for the nuclear power plants. And one of the main points that was made by a lot of the other organizations and speakers at this hearing in Columbus is that to fund this bailout, they're eliminating a fund that's used for conservation and energy savings. And that is incredibly short-sighted because that increases wastes. It makes businesses pay more because they can't replace their old inefficient lighting and equipment with new energy-efficient equipment and lighting. They end up losing money to First Energy because this conservation program, which has been wildly successful. I mean, every environmental organization that was there stood up and said that we've put about $1 billion into this, but documented $5 billion in savings for Ohio businesses. And that $5 billion means more people employed, more profits for the company. Everyone is better off with more efficiency in terms of energy usage. But they want to eliminate that program and replace it with this fee on every single Ohioan and every Ohio business and every Ohio industry, which is a fee that's geared towards energy sources which have historically provided power without increasing carbon. In other words, they without using the word nuclear, they created this narrow definition of clean that pretty much benefits only nuclear power plants and hydro. It actually cuts out wind and solar because wind and solar have not historically been a major energy source in the state of Ohio. And part of the reason they haven't been a major energy source is because this Ohio state legislature has passed laws preventing wind and reducing solar. They passed a setback law in 2014 that said you can't put a turbine within a quarter mile of your property line. And that means you have to own a half mile square of property, and then you can only put one turbine right in the middle. And what this did was that it eliminated wind farms. Almost no one physically has enough land to keep turbines that far back from their property lines. And it's unnecessary. It's not done that way anywhere else in the world with such a restrictive setback. And it killed the wind industry. So that was one of the points I made. Anyway, it's 8:15, and this is the point at which we typically open up the lines. And 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. And I have queued up here I have the recording of my testimony in front of this House Subcommittee, and I don't really want to play it. I want to hear from you. I would like to hear people calling, what do you think about this proposed Davis-Besse? Are you someone who actually works at the plant or has a friend or a family member who works there and wants this bailout? Or are you not? This is a question, and I'd like to hear from anybody, either for or against, because this is talk radio, and this is the best program in Ohio, but it gets better every time you call in. And so I'm going to give us another 4 minutes or so, and if no one's called in, then I'm going to go to the recording, but you can still call in while the recording's playing. We will stop the recording, take your call, and start it back up again. That's the wonderful thing about technology. So give us a call. So also in the show, after we hear this recording, which actually I hope we hear from you and don't have to play the recording, but after that, we'll hear from our fantastic sponsors. And then after that, we'll have our letter from the future. My great-great-granddaughter, Marie I., is still writing me letters from the year 2299. Very dependable granddaughter. She sends me one every week. There's this flash of photons next to my bed, and, poof, there's a letter. And, if you don't believe in time travel, just go watch the Avengers movie that is playing right now. I mean, that's all about time travel. And I'm not going to give any spoilers. Dan, my technician, just, jumped in and said, no spoilers. Okay. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I will just say that after I saw it, I kind of wondered, what was the number of that truck that drove through the plot holes and hit me? There's a lot of plot holes in them. I mean, if you don't pay attention to the plot and just watch the movie, it's great fun, tons of action. I'm not saying don't go see the movie. I'm just saying check your brain at the concession stand before you go in, and then pick it up again on your way out, and you'll enjoy it. You'll enjoy it a lot more. But I went with some friends. It was great. And I have friends, as I said at the start of the show, who are running the marathon right now, and there should be, somewhere almost halfway through now. And good luck to everyone running the marathon. And if anyone's listening on their, as they're running along online or on their radios, keep it up. You're doing great. It looked like it was going to be really nasty weather, but the rain literally stopped just at the start of the race. And so now it's nice and cool and not rainy, which is very good weather for marathon running. So good luck to everybody out there, and good luck to the fans. And let's see, do we have any callers? Does anyone dare give a call to 866-240-1065? That's 866-240-1065. We're going to give you guys about one more minute before we just jump into our recording. I do have to say there was one disappointing thing that happened at this hearing, and that is that some of the environmental organizations, and I have to say it's the ones with suits, the environmental organizations that had enough money that their people who testified were wearing nice, expensive suits. A lot of them got up there and said, we oppose eliminating the efficiency standards, but we also don't have any problem with nuclear power. And I was shocked, because a lot of those organizations got started because of the awareness of environmental issues that happened with things like the 3 Mile Island disaster. And so basically what's happening is that the billionaires who make the large donations, the Bill Gateses and the Michael Bloombergs, are going to these organizations and saying, here's your $50,000, $100,000 donation. Oh, and by the way, I really support nuclear power. And so they all stopped short of saying, we support nuclear power, but they went out of their way to point out, we don't have a problem with nuclear power. And prominent amongst these, unfortunately, was the Nature Conservancy. There's a fellow there, Leo Almeida, got up and spoke and said they don't have any problem with nukes. And later on in his testimony, when he was being questioned by Ganbari, he actually sort of threw into question one of the points that I had made, which is that the hot water from nuclear power plants promotes algal blooms by increasing the temperature of the water, which increases the rate the algae divide, and then that leads to blooms, and then blooms, once the algae die, they give off methane as they decompose. So nuclear really is not a carbon-free energy source by any means. And he didn't contradict me directly. He didn't say Joe is wrong about that. All he did was say, I've never heard of that. And, you know, that is enough to cast doubt. That's enough to give a politician like Ganbari cover to say, well, you know, the Nature Conservancy never heard of this. But it's a very well documented fact, and I supplemented my testimony to the state committee with documentation from proving this point. But at the critical point during the hearing, the Nature Conservancy guy got up there and basically kind of threw a question into the whole thing, and I was very disappointed by that. So what did you think of that? Are you a member of the Nature Conservancy? What do you think of the idea that your organization doesn't have a problem with nuclear power? Give a call in, and we'll cut you in. We're going to go to the recording now, but as I said, call in any topic, any moment, and we will prioritize you. We'll take your call at 866-240-1065.
All right, thank you and welcome. All right, at this time, we'd like to ask Ohio Green Party Political Director Joseph Delamar to please come forward. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, and thank you for hearing my testimony. And I promise I'm going to try to stay somewhere around 10 minutes, so other people should get a chance to speak. Good day, and thank you to the subcommittee for hearing my testimony. My name is Joseph Demare, D-E-M-A-R-E. I'm the political director for the Ohio Green Party and empowered to speak for the party on matters pertaining to Ohio's nuclear plants. The Green Party is a political party based on key values, including ecological wisdom and future focus. Based on those values, we have opposed nuclear power since our inception in the early 80s. And in fact, I wanted to revisit. In 2010, Davis-Besse was applying for relicensing, and we organized a people's hearing wherein we laid out for First Energy that they would make more profit, that their grid would be more stable, and that they would do better as a company if they closed their nuclear plants and switched at that time to wind and solar. And I'm going to enter into the record some testimony we had from Dr. Alvin Campan during those hearings. So they were warned. They knew what they were getting into. They don't have any excuse. But last week, I watched the testimony before the subcommittee from a string of nuclear power supporters. And I was frustrated at a string of outright lies, misinformation, and half-truths. That's why I requested time to speak before the committee today. I don't have time to counter every falsehood, but I would like to counter some of the most seriously ones. Specifically, most of the witnesses last week characterized Germany's switch to renewables as a failure. Exactly the opposite is true, as I hope to prove to the committee. Also, there were claims of economic harm if the plants are closed, and those are exaggerated. And finally, there were several miscellaneous half-truths that I'd like to correct for the record. First of all, Germany's change from nuclear and coal to renewables has been a very definite success. Renewables have easily replaced nuclear generation. As can be seen in the first graph in my testimony, even as nuclear declined from 2003 to 2017 by 89 terawatt hours, renewables increased by 117 terawatt hours. So there was no problem making up the lost power using wind and solar. Primarily, this increase came from wind. It was the largest portion of the increase, accounting for about 13% of it. But it also came from solar power, and it came from waste and biomass, and also 3% of it came from hydropower. So there's no threat to the grid by switching to wind and solar as your primary sources of generation. In fact, Germany has exceeded its goals for renewable generation They reached 33.1% in 2017. That, at one time, the people who wanted us to keep using coal and nuclear and gas said that that was impossible, that a grid would be unstable at that rate. Now we're being told that the grid can handle more than half. In fact, some are saying up to 70% renewable sources, especially now that battery storage has become a practical technology. So, as a result of Germany's policies, they've gone from a power importer to a power exporter. So this graph shows from 1990 to 2016, you can see that Germany has gone and now exports quite a bit of power to its neighboring country because of the additional capacity they've built through wind and solar. And one of the main customers that they have actually is France, because France's grid is, since it's so heavily dependent on nuclear, is less flexible. It's less able to ramp up and down. So in times of high demand, Germany's solar panels and wind turbines are keeping the lights on in French nuclear-powered houses. So this legislation includes nuclear in the definition of clean energy. That is wrong. Nuclear power is dirty power. 90% of the energy released in a nuclear reaction goes out into the environment as waste heat. This hot water is dumped into Lake Erie at our nuclear power plants, where it promotes algae growth, algae blooms, and these blooms cause eutrophication. That is, when the algae die, they generate methane gas as they decompose, and that is a huge greenhouse gas, and which would not be happening to that extent if we weren't literally heating the lakes with millions and millions of watts of heating power. Ohio's nuke plants are also leaking. They're leaking tritium. And then tritium is a radioactive form of hydrogen, which comes into the environment as water. Tritium pollution from our nuke plants threatens our $7 billion Lake Erie fishing and recreational tourism industries. All over the world, people are trying to avoid radioactive exposure. In fact, North Korea was just upheld. They have a ban on fish from the Fukushima region of Japan precisely because tritium is being poured into the waters there, and they don't wish to expose their people to the radiation released in tritium. And if word spreads that our nuclear plants are leaking radioactive water into Lake Erie, it could wipe out our tourism and fishing industries. And so you should think twice before threatening that $7 billion industry. Last week, Terry Joyce kept claiming that kept saying that warning against closing Ohio's nuclear plants prematurely. Actually, Davis-Besse is already operating beyond its 4-year designated lifespan. There's an increasing number of accidents and unplanned outages because the plants are already beyond their safe operating periods. And the unplanned outages, which are increasing as these plants age and as components wear out and break down, this obviates, or this crosses out the myth of baseload power. First of all, baseload power has been disproven in Germany. Nukes, in fact, provide too much power. Nukes have to go full on all the time, 800 megawatts, no matter what the demand is. And this inflexibility in today's market can cause problems, especially when they have an unplanned outage. If you take 800 megawatts off the grid like that because a generator tripped and went offline, the grid has to scramble to make up a huge amount of power, much more than if a wind turbine stops blowing or if a solar panel gets clouded. So this idea that nukes provide constant baseload power is becoming less and less true as plants age more and more and break down more and more often. Finally, the claims of economic harm were exaggerated. Lake County Commissioner came and stood before you last week complaining about the loss of tax revenues from Perry because they devalued their plants. Well, that is just a foretaste if you are dependent on single large sources of income, the one big employer. if you switch to decentralized generation, if you have lots of wind turbines and lots of solar panels, each of those installations also will pay taxes, pay school taxes and pay local taxes. And if you have enough of them, they'll more than make up for the loss of revenue from the one large plant. We need to switch to a different source of power, a decentralized power model. And the longer you put that off, the more dependent you stay on the one big old plant. The bigger the harm is going to be when the plant does finally shut down, because physics and engineering say these plants simply physically cannot continue to run forever. At some point, there's going to be some failure. At Davis-Besse, it might be a failure of the concrete outer shell. We don't know. At some point, there will be a failure, and these plants will have to shut down. Also, the proponents warned of increases in electricity prices if our nuke plants closed. In fact, Dean Murphy from the Brattle Group claimed that they would go up significantly. But his study looked at costs over a 10-year period. Wind and solar have come down in prices incredibly over the past 10 years. So including data from 10 years ago almost does not really apply to today's wind and solar, which are the cheapest form of new generation, cheaper than coal, cheaper than natural gas, much cheaper than nuclear. So, and also, there is a difference between investment and wasting money. The Greens in Germany and the German people have pushed this switch over to renewables. And there's a lot of outcry. They're saying, oh, Germany now has the most expensive power in the region. Well, the most expensive power averages out, according to Fortune magazine, to about $100 per month per residential customer. If you heat with electric in Ohio, even if you have a small apartment, you're already paying $150, maybe $175 a month. And $100 a month, that money is being invested in a clean future, in a reliable grid. And it should be pointed out that Germany's grid is the most reliable in Europe. In fact, Germany's grid is more reliable than our grid. They have blackouts and brownouts less often than we do in the first energy territory and even in AEP's territory. Sorry about that, guys. But this is closing down the nuclear plants so that we can encourage the wind and the solar would be an investment in the future. So even if there's a short-term price increase, there's a long-term benefit. And we saw that directly in Bowling Green, Ohio, where I live. It's nice to have a representative in the House again in Bowling Green. We put up 4 utility-scale turbines about 11 years ago. They took almost 10 years to pay off, and during that time, it was a little more expensive. But now that they're paid off, they're generating power at half the market rate, and they have at least another 15 to 20 years serviceable life. So in the long run, Bowling Green will save money because we've switched to wind and solar. And then finally, you're being asked to consider 2 very different opinions here. You're being asked by the nuclear industry and their proponents to continue to support them, and you're being asked by people who oppose nuclear power and that sort of unsustainable generation to support them. You have to decide which side is telling the truth. And I just wanted to very quickly make a quick list of things that the nuclear power industry has stood upon many a podium, has stood up in front of many a camera, and just flat out lied to the American people. And one of those was the original promises of nuclear power would be that it would be too cheap to meter. It would be so plentiful that we wouldn't even need, we'd just pay a flat monthly rate. It doesn't matter how much power you could use. So that was a lie. During the 3 Mile Island crisis, nuclear power representatives got up and during that crisis and for the next 20 years maintained there's no meltdown. All the systems work perfectly. The plant shut down as planned. Then once they actually got cameras into the core, oh, yes, there was a meltdown. Sorry about that. I guess we were lying. The nuclear plants, there was also the major lie that was maintained for many years that nuclear power plants cannot suffer meltdowns, that there's too many safeguards, too much redundancy. Then we all watched in horror at Fukushima as the nuclear plants did proceed to melt down. So any nuclear power plant has the potential to become another Fukushima. It just needs the right set of circumstances. And so, in conclusion, yes, there is a conclusion. Every minute of every day that a nuclear plant runs, it generates over 200 radioactive nuclides. And these nuclides, some of them last for tens of years, some for hundreds of years, some for thousands, some for millions of years. And every one of them can cause diseases like cancer, mutation, and other diseases. And so the question really is, and the question you need to ask yourselves, are you willing to burden our descendants, essentially in human terms forever, in order to enjoy the moment, the single second of electricity that a nuclear plant generates? Because the real crime of nuclear power is not the fact that they generate power. The real crime is that they generate these wastes, and it's inevitable, it's unavoidable, and you have to ask yourself, and I'm asking you to be a little green today and apply one of our 10 key values, the future focus, and imagine a descendant of ours, it could be any of ours shared, 100 years from now, encountering a radioactive isotope that's being generated at this second in First Energy's plants at Davis-Besse. And that person could become sick. That person could become ill. They could die. They could get cancer. And the question you have to ask yourself is, are you willing to take the responsibility for the death of future generations for this generation's very short-term benefit? That's it. Thank you. I'm willing to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there questions for this witness? I believe Representative Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for testifying here this morning, sir. I will respectfully we will probably agree to disagree on a lot, but I specifically, I know a lot of people are going to testify today. And let me preference my question for all the witnesses that are going to come here forward today. I'm interested in House Bill 6. What in House Bill 6 do you oppose?
I oppose the definition of nuclear power as clean energy.
Okay, and that's the only thing that you disagree with in this legislation?
If you remove nuclear power from the legislation, it has some merits.
I'm not so sure that the nuclear power is in the legislation, but that's for us to disagree on. Have you ever been to a nuclear plant?
I've been to shut down nuclear plants, or I've been to nuclear waste reprocessing plants. I have not toured the inside of a nuclear plant, no.
Sure. And what expertise do you bring today in testifying when it comes to energy, renewables, and any information like that? Help us understand whether your testimony is real, fake, or indifferent.
My expertise comes from literally my entire adult life of watching the nuclear industry, paying attention to its problems. In fact, I had a story that I wasn't going to include in this, but since you've asked. My 18th birthday, I went to a symposium at the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. This was my idea of birthday fun on nuclear power. And they had both proponents and opponents. And there were presentations given on the effect of ionizing radiation on cells. There were studies done on how much radiation hurts people. And apparently there's no threshold below which there's no damage. But the end of the presentation, the end of the symposium, was a debate between a pro-nuclear and an anti-nuclear activist. And at the start of that debate, the pro-nuclear person got up and said, "Before we begin this debate, I just want you all to know we have solved the nuclear waste problem." And the anti-nuclear person said, "Well, what's the solution?" He said, "I can't tell you right now, but trust me, we've solved it." And that, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, that was 38 years ago, and no solution has been forthcoming from the nuclear power industry. So I feel in many ways I'm more qualified to talk about the nuclear industry than nuclear power representatives whose earnings and living depend on promoting this and when necessary, telling falsehoods to legislators like yourselves.
And just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Let me pivot to some of your testimony. You said that, do you support generally personal property rights?
Yes.
Okay, I do too. So you talk about getting rid of nuclear for your purposes. You don't want to see nuclear be a part of Ohio's generation portfolio.
Well, for our purposes, I'm trying to protect you as well,
Sure.
Representative Cross.
That's good. Yeah. So let me ask this question then. Do you think there's enough land and landowners that would allow renewables such as wind and solar in Ohio to make up a huge chunk of the power that nuclear does here in Ohio, for Ohio?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, that was detailed in El Campan's study that I'll be sharing with the committee. And especially when you apply solar, especially when you put solar on rooftops and over parking lots, there's more than enough space in the state of Ohio. And remember, a wind turbine only takes up about a 40-foot square section of land because they're very tall. They do go down deep, but farmers can literally farm right up to the base of a turbine. And turbines, for optimal distribution, are often as much as an eighth or quarter mile apart, depending on the wind and the terrain. So they look like there's a lot of things there if you're looking at a wind farm, but if you actually walk from turbine to turbine, you'll see that they're very far apart and you can do a lot of stuff in between. And yes, there's plenty of room in Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just end with my comments. I don't think there is. I disagree with you. If you come to my district in the 83rd District, Logan County does not want wind or solar, so take off that land. If you come to Hardin County, 90% of the landowners probably don't want
well, sir, there's been a coordinated effort to misinform farmers in most places.
Let me finish. Thank you. And if you come to my district, because I don't pretend to be a nuclear expert, and I've toured a nuclear facility. If you come to Hancock County, you would understand that Hancock County local governments have turned down wind and solar in certain projects. I'm not saying every district's equal, but I'm just saying that you're trying to take away nuclear generation and think that you're going to automatically have landowners just wildly accept wind and solar in every corner of Ohio. That doesn't seem reasonable when personal property rights, which you and I support, it's my right on my property that I don't want to have a wind or solar, or, you know, so I certainly can make that decision for myself. I just don't think those expectations are realistic.
Yes, Representative Cross, I'm not suggesting that the state legislature force farmers to put turbines on their property, but I think you'll find in most places in the country, especially places where wind is developed, that farmers actually support them because they're a reliable source of income. They go with the wind. They don't go with crop cycles, or they can't be wiped out by a patch of bad weather. So in most of the country, wind turbines are supporting farmers and helping keep farms alive. There has been a definite attempt to provide disinformation to our local farmers here in Ohio and in Michigan from companies that don't want competition from a cheap energy source which can benefit everyone in the community as opposed to a few people who own a large plant.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We could spend all day having a conversation. Unfortunately, as you know, with the room, we aren't going to be able to. I will bring up 2 points. One, nowhere in House Bill 6 do we preface or use the words nuclear energy. We talk about clean energy, carbon-free energy production. We do not use the word nuclear. So I would refer you to the bill. There is no reference specifically to nuclear energy. It's about clean, carbon-free energy of any generational source, which certainly would include nuclear, but it is not mentioned or specifically called out in the legislation. Were you aware of that?
I was aware of that. However, I think that nuclear is unfairly excluded from being a carbon emitter. As I said in my testimony, it promotes eutrophication, which releases methane. Also, the construction of nuclear power plants puts a great deal of carbon into the air. And I disagree, again, that nuclear even meets that definition. I wouldn't mind, if you wanted a suggestion for improving the bill, I would suggest that in your definitions, you specifically exclude nuclear as a clean energy source.
I appreciate the comment. I'll make one last comment, and that is, I know that you have concern about nuclear, but it's interesting that there are 50,000 radioisotope medical procedures in the United States each and every day, used to save people's lives, used to cure them from cancers and diagnose them on a regular basis. So I believe that in some ways your fear of radiation in general is somewhat unfounded when we use 50,000 medical procedures each day in the United States. If you care to comment on that, you're welcome to.
Yes, sir. There's a very different, it's very different to have a radioactive medical procedure. Often if it's a radiation beam therapy, you're in one spot, you get zapped with gamma rays or whatever, and then it turns off. That's a discrete event. It has a beginning and an end. The nuclear radiation that nuclear plants release gets dispersed into the environment, and it gets absorbed into our bodies, into our bones, and into our organs. And those radiation sources are constantly emitting. So it's as if you had one of these medical radiation treatments inside your body radiating out nonstop. And so it's a very different, the health effects of randomly exposing the population to 200 different radioactive isotopes is extremely different from picking a specific radioisotope and applying it to a specific disease. And I would also say that radiation seldom cures cancer. It's often used as a treatment for cancer. But I think what we're finding now that we have more scientific knowledge is that technologies like immunotherapy can actually cure cancers that radiation therapy in the past has only been able to sort of knock back for a while. So,
well, again, thank you for your testimony. Are there any other? Rep. Gambari?
Thank you, Co-Chair Stein. Sir, thank you for your testimony this morning. I believe that part of this testimony is really to kind of listen and learn and have a dialogue. So I have a couple questions based on a few things that you said. You noted in your testimony regarding the algal blooms in Lake Erie. What's the, this is the first time that I've heard nuclear power plants increasing the algal blooms in Lake Erie. What's the underlying science that you can target directly to the algal blooms in Lake Erie and the nuclear power plants?
Sure. The underlying science is that the western end of Lake Erie is the shallowest part of the lake, and that's where most of the algal blooms occur. That's where Davis-Besse is situated. As I said before, 90% of the heat generated, 90% of the energy generated by Davis-Besse is waste heat, and about half of that goes out the cooling tower, but the other half goes directly into the lake. The fundamental scientific principle is that warm water rises. If you put millions of watts of heat energy in hot water into the lake, that water will come up to the surface of the lake, and that's where all the photosynthesis occurs. So if you warm that top layer where all the photosynthesis is happening, the algae will divide faster, and faster dividing algae can promote an algae bloom.
Follow-up.
Follow-up, allow.
Thank you. So you indicated that that part of Lake Erie is the shallower part. So if that was a significantly deeper part, would you still say that because the nuclear power plant is there, that there would still be a significant case of the algal blooms?
Well, the more you can mix the water before it gets to the surface layer, the less impact it has. But you can't input energy into a system and not have an effect. You can't change the parameters that govern how microorganisms grow without changing the way microorganisms grow. So I can't answer that question with any specificity beyond saying the more you mix, the lower the impact. But that's a little academic, since Davis-Besse is there and we're not going to move it. So, yeah.
Follow-up? Another follow-up, if I may, sir.
Okay.
So I think it's about, estimates are at least 20 countries or so dealing with nuclear energy that provide energy security, while reducing air pollution and cutting greenhouse gas emissions. I can tell you as a naval officer, nuclear energy is really key to a lot of what we do in the Navy. I would like to know, and I think Representative Cross may have touched upon this briefly as far as wind and solar, and your concern is with the definitions of clean energy, if I'm understanding you correctly. So if wind and solar, do you believe that wind and solar would be able to fill the gap in the state of Ohio if those nuclear power plants were to be shut down?
Yes, I do, absolutely. And I believe that if the state of Ohio hadn't effectively outlawed wind farm development in the 2014 setback law, we would already have sufficient wind to replace Davis-Besse.
So the Energy Information Agency, the EIA, indicates that the amount of clean electricity in Ohio will decline 89%. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not familiar with that study. And are you suggesting that it will decline 89% if the
Yes.
nuclear is subsidized? I would say that that has been the case since the 70s, that nuclear power has gotten very many subsidies and very many encouragements from the federal government to a degree beyond which it needed, and to a degree which has suppressed the development of wind and solar. Denmark basically is the country that kicked our butt when it came to wind power technology because we gave it up. We kept putting more and more money into nuclear, and so we lost out on the technology that allows us to build these utility scale turbines, which are economically practical. Yes, I think that if you essentially help the nuclear industry maintain its unnatural position as a supplier of so much power in Ohio, I do believe that will suppress wind and solar development.
Follow up. One last question for you, sir. Okay, so going back to the EIA as well, they indicate that Ohio Nuclear has provided 9 times more electricity in 2017 than solar and wind combined. Okay, so if that's the case and the nuclear power plants were to shut down, would you say that it would be a worthy goal for us to remove our state's carbon-free generation that we currently have with the nuclear power plants?
Well, Representative, the situation here is that the state legislature essentially outlawed wind power. There were about $7 billion in wind power projects planned that were canceled once the unreasonable setback law was put in place. And so to outlaw wind power in 2014 and then in 2019 come back and say there's not enough wind power kind of puts the onus for that situation on the Ohio State Legislature. So I think that if we were to have what was once called a goal for the state of Ohio, which is a truly competitive marketplace, the nuclear plants would already be shut down and the wind power and the solar power would already have ramped up to replace them.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was it. That was the testimony. And you can hear from the hostile tone of the Republicans that they're probably going to pass this bill through the subcommittee anyway, no matter what anyone says. But hope you got something out of listening to that. It was a bit of an adventure driving down to Columbus and making that testimony. So now it's time to hear from our sponsors. And our first sponsor is the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural areas, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging program that teaches people to love and respect nature, restoring wildlife habitats, and leading outdoor adventures. The Wood County Parks protects 20 parks and nature preserves all around Wood County, which are open from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And today is their fantastic Community Earth Day celebration that's going to be happening at the Montessori School in Bowling Green. That's at 515 South Sandridge Road. It's going from 2 to 4 p.m. today, and it looks like it's going to be an absolutely beautiful day to be out. And they have about 25 participants with tables and booths
And the requirement for participating in this is that you could not have a booth that just passed out literature. So there's 25 different activities, different fun things to do and learn about the environment. They've got a giant earth ball. They've got an archery range. It's a great thing, and it's happening today from 2 to 4, so get the family out there. On May 11th from 9 to 2, they're going to have their annual native plant sale. That's at the Park District headquarters on Mercer Road in Bowling Green. No pre-registration necessary, but you can still pre-order annuals at wcparks.org/friends. And finally, at the Carter Historic Farm Wetland Restoration Project, they're having a ribbon cutting and tour during the Heritage Farm Fest. That's going to be Saturday, June 1st from 3 to 7 p.m. at the Black Swamp Conservancy helped sponsor this one, and you can contact them for more information. Director at blackswamp.org. Then you can contact Rob Crane. So a lot of great opportunities and a lot of great stuff coming from the Wood County Park District, and we're very happy to have them as a sponsor. Our other sponsor is DeMar Consulting. DeMar Consulting is a computer consulting business, and what they do is they will come out to your home and they'll help you with your computer. Maybe your printer isn't working, doesn't talk to your computer for some reason. Maybe you're having trouble with your home network. Maybe you can't log on to the internet anymore. They'll come out, and for a very reasonable fee, they will help you through whatever problems you have. DeMar Consulting, everyone who works for DeMar Consulting has a degree in computer science, so you know that they know what they're talking about. And you can contact them in 2 ways. One is by phone or text at 419-973-3000. That's 419-973-3000. Or you can go to their website, demarconsulting.com. And that's spelled DEMARE, then the word consulting.com. And you can also access their email through there. So thank you very much to our sponsors, and thank you to our patrons. We also have patrons on patreon.com, and if you want to become a patron, you simply go there and you can sign up to give a little donation, $1, $5, $10 a month to help keep this program going. And thank you to you, of course, the listeners. We've only got 2 minutes left. That's just enough time to read the letter from the future from my great-great-granddaughter, Marie I. Dear Great-Great-Grandpa, hello from the Kola Peninsula in the year 2299. Since we're above the Arctic Circle, the days are already much longer this far north than they are down in your area in Ohio. In fact, sunrise is at 3:30 in the morning. I took advantage of that to walk down to the bay and look at the ocean before starting my workday. It was beautiful and noisy because of the nesting birds. As I was on the shore, I noticed some spray spouting up, and I realized I could see a pod of orcas out in the water. They seemed to be hunting something. In your time, wild animals were dying. Entire species were going extinct, and all populations were in decline. In my time, populations are growing. It's great to see a growing number of all kinds of animals, whales, birds, deer, bison, insects. It's like spring all over the world. Anyway, I was lost in watching the whales, finally forgetting about my messed up personal life and the situation with Michael, Igor, and Susan. When I felt a tap on my shoulder, it was Michael. He had had the same idea as me. We talked, and he told me he didn't care for Susan at all. She had tried to attach herself to him, but he had finally told her he simply wasn't interested. We watched the whales together for a while, then I ended up going back to his room with him. So before, I was videoing with Igor and not telling Michael. Now I'm back with Michael without telling Igor. All my resolve to approach this thing rationally as a scientist have collapsed. I don't know what to do. Maybe you could give me some advice, Great-Great-Grandpa. Anyway, I love writing you. Keep up the good work, and you are helping create the green future. Love, Marie I. That's it for this show. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a creeping and crawling.